Hello and welcome again to one of our SAMexpert events, and we're continuing the series of our Microsoft Audit related events, which we run for service providers and everybody around the service provider industry. Today, we're going to discuss the topic that may seem too technical to some of you, but I promise I'll keep it as accessible as possible. Please pay attention, even if you don't understand the technical terms, because mistakes at this stage of the audit, well, honestly, every stage of the audit will affect your penalty negotiations, and some of them may be irreversible. There's nothing impossible, but some things are very difficult to reverse. So be careful with what data you provide and understand why they require it, and how do you gather it, and how do you maintain it in a way which protects you from unnecessary penalties. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexander Golev, and I'm responsible for the branch of SAMexpert's business that takes care of service providers. We are a boutique consulting company specializing on everything related to Microsoft, but we don't sell any Microsoft licenses. So effectively, we play against Microsoft. We help reduce costs, negotiate audits, optimize agreements, optimize cloud usage, and because we don't sell any Microsoft stuff, it's always on your side. And we have supported various provider and ISV organizations in over 100 audits, and we have a 100% win rate. We always reduce the bill better than you would have done it without us. The exciting data gathering stage. What do the auditors want and why? And how you provide it to them? What to do and what to avoid? So let's discuss that. And I want to begin not from the data and tools, but from the timeline. When do you need to start paying attention to it if you don't do it on a regular basis? First of all, you must get ready for this stage immediately when you receive the audit notice from Microsoft. At some point in the audit, you will have to gather the data. So start preparing immediately when you receive the notice. And what can you do? What do you need to do in the first 30 days since the notice in regards to preparing to how you're going to gather the data and what data you need to gather? First of all, we'll always repeat this. Understand the scope. Where will you have to gather this data from? You need to assess what environments in your hosting estate are 100% in this plus scope and which are outside of the scope, such as colocation, dedicated hardware where the clients bring 100% of their licenses, Linux-only clusters, your internal corporate usage that you don't have to license with SPLA. You can use volume licenses or partner licenses for internal use. If it's separate, you shouldn't gather any data from that environment. So you need to very narrowly focus the estates, the environments, the data centers, the clusters, the hardware blades to just the number of devices or clusters from which you need to gather the data. Don't overshare. It's my mantra. Don't overshare. It must become your mantra too. Then the next question is, what tools do you have to collect the inventory data? Every auditor will bring their own scripts, but they may accept your data. The problem is that the tools that you have may not satisfy what the auditors want from you. It's important to understand and write down what tools and scripts you already use. Many providers we find have their own scripting solutions. Some providers may have traditional software asset management tools that gather the inventory data on which then they calculate how many licenses they have to report, and they report it. They bill their clients. We've seen all sorts of custom solutions. And we've seen cases when nobody counts anything. It's just a finger in the air. We probably have to report this, really. This is not a rare case. You may be surprised. If you have a tool like Octopus Cloud, for example, or SPLA Manager, or any other dedicated tool, well, great. Specialized tools are the best you can have. But you may also have a traditional inventory tool or an internal script, or maybe scripts that you saved from the previous audit. Why not? Many providers go through second or third audit right now. And next, you need to answer the following questions. Is the tool covering all in-scope environments, service, virtual machines? Then, is there anything that is not in scope for SPLA or CSP hosting or other hosting needs? You will want to exclude that. You don't want that to be in the tool. You don't want it to be in the scope of your script, at least in that data that you are planning to provide to the auditors. And the most important question is, do you trust the tool? If you have a tool like Octopus, my question is always, is it your day-to-day go-to tool for end client billing and SPLA reporting? Because we find that it's installed, it's deployed, and it's used in the process, but it's not the final source of truth. And funny enough, specialized tools in SPLA are the only software asset management tools that can be fully fine-tuned to provide that data in an automated way without human interaction at the reporting stage. Obviously, you need to fine-tune them. You need to make sure that you flag BYOL, bring your own license, bring your own license. You need to make sure that all the servers are scanned, but the reporting is 100% accurate when you've done that. So you need to answer the question when you get that audit notice, whether you trust your tool or maybe you should default to auditor scripts. It may be a better choice for you if you don't trust the data or you think the data is not clean enough, not accurate enough in your tool. You may still use it in the process. You may still use it to validate the tools, but you need to answer that question, whether you want to use it. If you have an experienced audit defense partner like us, like SAMexpert, then it's better to involve one of such partners. Be very careful with asking for assistance from resellers, from SPLA resellers. The problem is, officially they say, yes, we do help our partners. Unofficially, it will most likely be limited to, we tell our clients, providers, how to run the audit scripts. You need much more than that. Their hands are tied. They're Microsoft partners. They have to play the Microsoft game. They're metered on sales. Be careful. You need more. Listen to that advice, but understand it's not the entire story. If you want to assess your tools yourself, primarily pay attention to the scope and to the data quality. And remember that your biggest risk is oversharing. You can always provide additional data later. So when you provide the data, when you gather the data and provide it in small chunks. Provide less, give them less. If they want more, they'll come back and ask for more. And if they have a reason to ask for more, you'll give it to them later. It's very difficult to roll back what you have already shared. So what do the auditors actually want from you? Finally, we get into the most important part. So the first bit of data they request doesn't come from a tool. They will give you a questionnaire. Probably an Excel spreadsheet with basic questions like how many data centers you have, in how many locations, how many end clients you have, what products do you host for these end clients. And when you respond to this questionnaire, here's our advice. Number one, provide clear, concise, and dry answers. Don't mumble. Don't answer vaguely. It's better not to answer a question at all than provide a vague or dodgy answer. You go on a tangent and start telling a whole story of why and what and maybes. No, don't do that. You give them ideas. You give them a reason to doubt what you're saying. You can't answer a question, don't answer it. If you answer a question, answer it in their language. Be as technical in your responses as you can. Speak their language, speak Microsoft's language. It will reduce the number of their assumptions and it will reduce your frustrations. And I repeat it again, do not overshare. If you don't know the answer, don't rush answering. Research the answer, ask around, ask an expert, ask a stakeholder. If it's a question related to your sales, ask your sales. Don't just throw any answer because you can't be bothered into that questionnaire and send it back being irritated by the fact that you were put on this audit. This is what we see. Humans react emotionally to these tasks and make mistakes, then increase the length of the audit, increase the size of the penalties. So just be professional, please. I beg you. And by the way, this is why we're against delegating it to the IT department, not only because the IT department is very busy, it's also because the IT department is the IT department. And I want to pause the main narrative, and I really want to go on a tangent here, spend a couple of minutes to emphasize, do not let the auditors communicate to your IT without supervision. It happens often, and every time it happens, things go wrong. Treat your IT as, I would say, college genius, incredibly clever high school students, and assign a chaperone to all the communications. And no offense to IT. Guys, if you're from the IT here, I'm not trying to offend you. It's just the experience. You are the experts at what you do. But you're not the experts in legal and commercial endeavors involving multi-million risks in many cases. You may be, some of you may be that good. You do what you do. Put somebody who's not as technical, but who can supervise all the communications back and forth, inbound communications and outbound communications, and review all the data. Be vigilant. What we see is if there's a very good, clever IT person assigned to talk to the auditors, they will just provide the data the auditors ask them to provide without checking whether that's the right data. The script could run without errors. It could gather all the data. It's not necessarily what you need to provide. So supervise everything. Be vigilant. If you are assigned to this communication, then don't just react technically as a technical person. Don't just, what's what I'm looking for, dance to their music. Be clever about what you share, please. We're finally getting to the most technical, the core part of today's discussion. What data do the auditors want? Technical data, and why? They will give you scripts and instructions in every case. They will come with their own scripts and their own instructions. They should also provide you with exact requirements, either upfront or when you ask for them, the exact requirements for the data, which fields they need, from where that data needs to be gathered. You may ask for it if it's not a part of their presentation. The very first inventory data they want is your hardware and virtual machines. They will provide you with platform-specific scripts. For VMware or Hyper-V, which is the easiest, for VMware, for example, you can either use their scripts, or they may just ask you, please provide us with RVTools reports. RVTools is a tool that extracts all the data from VMware and presents it in a nice Excel format. We, in SAMexpert, haven't yet seen working scripts for less popular hypervisors like Proxmox or Nutanix, for example. So you may have to extract the data yourselves and populate a spreadsheet provided by the auditor. If they don't provide the spreadsheet, ask for a template. Why do they need this data? There are a few reasons, at least two. The first reason is to get a list of all the virtual and physical machines in scope. This is the baseline list of all the so-called systems running Microsoft software. I'm using the formula that's in the agreement. Systems running Microsoft software. You're supposed to provide access to those systems. If you follow the language of the agreement, nobody asks you in real life for access to the systems. You will run scripts, but they need to see the list of those systems, including physical and virtual systems. The second reason, this is the foundation for the so-called hardware inventory report, which is a part of the final audit report. And by the way, in many cases, that report does not go to Microsoft. Microsoft only sees the final commercial calculations without the money, just the number of licenses. The hardware report is a compulsory part of the audit report. It could be a separate file. Some auditors provide them as a separate file. Some auditors include that as a tab in the report, which could be called a hardware inventory or master server list. It's another name that you may have heard before. And the third reason, this data is also used to calculate Windows Server licenses. By providing this data, you're providing them with the required metrics to calculate the Windows Server licenses, which are processor and core numbers. As simple as that. Strictly speaking, the bare minimum they need is the following. A, host to guest mapping, which VMs run on which hosts. B, clusters to see where the virtual machines may move, to what hosts. It's required information. C, physical processors and cores. And virtual processor and cores as well, because that data will be used to calculate requirements for software like SQL Server, for example, which is based on virtual cores. When you've provided your hardware and virtualization data, the next two things they will ask you to provide will be A, machine ownership, and B, software and user inventory from each machine. Let's talk about each of these separately. Machine ownership is basically what end client owns what machines. Simple. Here's a list of machines. Please tell us which end clients use these machines. If it's internal use, it's internal use. Just flag it as internal use. And there are two reasons why they ask it. The first reason is when they calculate the licensing start date, they should, and they normally do, by the way, I would expect it to always happen, they should consider the date you onboarded the client, the date when you started the service for a particular client, because it's not necessarily the date when the virtual machine was created. We have seen cases when a virtual machine would be created in 2009 and brought to a service provider state in 2018. If you don't provide that information to the auditor, as is to whom this machine belongs and when you started serving this client, they would assume you had to license it starting in 2009. So it's good for you to give them the machine ownership data. It's beneficial for you. That's what the agreement says. If you don't demonstrate a different scope and duration, we will assume it's always been there. It's always been running, and you always had to pay us for that software. This is how Microsoft says it. The second reason is that those of you who are on the old SPLA agreements, you're required to report details of your clients who consume over $1,000 of SPLA software in a single calendar month. And recently, due to regulatory pressure from the EU mostly, this is no longer required in the new SPLA. If you have recently signed a new SPLA agreement, renewed your SPLA agreement, you should have noticed that it's no more a requirement. It has nothing to do with the penalties anyway. It's more like if you don't do that, you're going to have a sorry face. Nobody's going to penalize you monetarily for this. But, well, if the local office has a target to reduce the number of SPLA partners, this could be used as an excuse to cancel your SPLA. So careful. You need to be compliant with all the terms and conditions of SPLA. It's not always about how much money you have to pay. It may sometimes affect your entire SPLA business. So please pay attention to those requirements. Software and user inventory, the next steps, is where the fun begins. They will ask you to scan all virtual and physical machines with the audit scripts or provide data from your tools. And this is a standard approach. That's what Microsoft expects, and that's what auditors expect. They expect you to run, and they require you to run scripts that inventory every single virtual machine, whether you support it or not. And pushing back on scanning virtual machines because you don't support them or you have no access is not easy. It's possible, but it's not easy. You should be ready, in the worst case, to run the scripts and scan them all. You can push back. But don't expect it to be easy. You will need bulletproof arguments and bulletproof evidence that there's no way you can access that machine and you're not responsible for what the clients install inside that virtual machine. It is not just a simple declaration. It is not a default approach. It's a topic for a even separate discussion. So let's keep it technical. That inventory consists of two parts. It's software data and user data. And to collect the software data, unless you have satisfactory tools, you will probably run their scripts. And the scripts are either Visual Basic or PowerShell scripts. Those scripts are usually run once per domain or per workgroup. The scripts remotely invoke WMI queries. They query registry and other functions of Windows to gather what software is installed. The goal of these scripts is to see what's installed. Simple. Software title, its version, its edition, and hopefully, and you want that to be included, when it was installed. The installation date is a very important bit of data, and you want it to be collected. So they don't assume that it was always installed on that machine. If anything is missing in the script output, the auditors will later come back and ask you to provide additional evidence, like screenshots, usually screenshots, or maybe some other script outputs. As probably the most frequent example, SQL Server and Visual Studio editions are often missing from the script outputs due to various WMI limitations. For example, if you deploy a SQL Server reporting server on a separate machine, flash news, it's licensable, and the script is unable to extract the edition of the SQL Server from which you cut out the reporting server and put it on a separate machine. That is manually gathered data, and they will ask you to log into that server and take screenshots clearly demonstrating what SQL Server edition you used to install that reporting service, just as one of the examples. Analysis services is a frequent problem. Visual Studio, starting from about 2019, is a nightmare to extract the edition, and that will probably require you to run a command line tool, so that's sort of additional data. Why they need it? They just want to see what Microsoft software runs on every machine in your cloud, on your hosting, so they can begin calculating how many licenses you had to report in each calendar month. They use software title, version. Actually, they don't need a version. SPLA is versionless, but edition is important. Standard or enterprise, it's very important because the price is different, the SKU is different. And the installation date, because that's the date from which they will assume you had to report the licenses. However, you may know that some of the Microsoft software is licensed per user. And for example, Microsoft Office Standard, Microsoft Office Professional Plus, pre-365. I'm not talking about 365 versions or editions. Visual Studio Enterprise or Professional, it's a user license. And even SQL Server Standard can be licensed per user with subscriber access licenses. Plus, to access desktops where that software is installed, users must be licensed with remote desktop user licenses. And that is why the other data set is the information about users and security groups. If a machine is a domain member, that's easy. You will be asked to extract data from AD for the entire domain. They already have the local security groups in the script outputs, in the inventory script outputs. The other missing bit here that they require is your AD user data Active Directory. They will provide the necessary scripts, or they will tell you what command line tools to run to extract the data, or PowerShell commands, or CSVDE. If you're technical, you probably know that piece of software, that app that is part of the Windows Server package. If a machine is standalone or a member of a workgroup, the user data is already included in the inventory script, so you probably won't have to run anything additional. Nothing additional will be required. And here's the reason, by the way, why traditional SAM tools like Flexera and Snow aren't good enough. They simply don't provide the required security group and user data to calculate user licenses in SPLA. They don't do that. And some of you who work with these tools, and I used to work with Snow for a while, so I know how they work. You may argue that these tools do provide that information, so let me explain, as somebody who's used these tools. Snow License Manager does track software usage on remote desktops, but that is not what SPLA requires. SPLA doesn't care about usage. SPLA requires a simple count of all the users who are authorized to access remote desktop and software. Usage doesn't matter at all. If a user doesn't access a remote desktop for a month, a license is still required. If that user is a member of a security group with remote desktop access, that user always requires a license, whether that user is active or inactive. We can argue about them being disabled, but if they're enabled and not using software in remote desktop, they still require licenses. And that kind of information is only gathered by specialized SPLA reporting tools like Octopus Cloud. Or we have heard, but I'd like to see that in action, not seen, can't confirm, that there are allegedly third-party add-ons to tools like Flexera that can do the same. I can imagine that it's totally possible, and we have friends that support Flexera, and this is why I know that there are such add-ons, but I haven't seen them in action, so can't really comment on that. The required data from such tools and scripts normally includes all security groups and all the user accounts, plus details like creation dates, last logon dates, and whether an account is enabled. And why? Because that data allows them to more or less accurately estimate how many user licenses were required in each previous month. I remind you, a SPLA report is essentially a number of reports per month extrapolated from the current data set. They're trying to guess, they're trying to calculate. And the more accurate data you give to them, the more accurate the calculations will be. The more data you provide about changes, creations, onboarding dates, the more accurate the report will be. If they find software, this is another bit, the last layer of complication here, and the last request for data. If they find software that has its own access controls, they will come back and either provide specialized audit scripts or ask you to gather alternative evidence. And what could be that software? SharePoint. Simple example, SharePoint server. Azure DevOps server used to be called Teams Foundation server. Legacy Dynamics products like Navision. And if remote desktop access is controlled by Citrix software or appliances, they may require additional scripts or screenshots or any database extracts. However, there is a very complicated case on top of that. It's a much more complicated case. It's when you're reporting SQL Server standard per user. You're allowed to do so instead of CORS. And that is the most challenging scenario because SQL Server is almost never accessed directly. It's accessed through any middle tier software, for example, accounting software or design software, some kind of software. There may be hundreds of third-party software titles that all have their own ways of managing authorized users. And more often than not, you will be required to provide screenshots listing the users that have access to that software. The auditor will ask you for evidence of client onboarding. It's not all about the technical data. And sometimes end of service dates when you say, oh, we've just offboarded the client, the machines are still running, but that's for legal purposes. It's a good excuse, but you need to provide them with evidence. And how you provide it to them depends. By default, they will ask you to share all your end client contracts. You may consider that sensitive information. So you may also provide them an extract from your CRM or a billing system, which is quite reasonable, by the way. Plus, and that is very important, especially these days, if you allow your clients to deploy their own Microsoft licenses, so you have no control around what they deploy, you will need evidence of that. You will not get away with a simple declaration, we don't provide them Microsoft Office. This is what Microsoft says. This is how they play this game. You are responsible for everything in your data centers unless you have evidence to the contrary. So you need evidence of bring your own license in writing. Evidence of the end clients accepting compliance responsibility as well. The auditors will ask for it, and they won't accept a verbal declaration. Don't expect them to accept a verbal declaration. It never works. You may then take that discussion to Microsoft and explain why you weren't able to gather that information. You may even win. You may even build a case. I'm not saying you can't. You can. It's just the audit report won't include that excuse. It will list that as your responsibility, and you'll take it to the commercial negotiation with Microsoft. And what you want to do at this stage is counter that commercial negotiation with the lowest number possible. This is your goal. Don't just say, oh, we're going to negotiate it. Do you want to negotiate from 20 million or from 5? That's sometimes the difference. I'd like to discuss how you can use this knowledge that I just shared with you to improve your audit readiness, because audit is not about the audit itself. It makes sense to prepare for an event of an audit. And before I do that, by the way, I need to tell you that if you need an audit readiness checklist, we have an audit readiness checklist that we put together. Send me an email to ask@SAMexpert.com, ask@SAMexpert.com. We have a PDF document listing the most important audit readiness items. There are about 30. I can share it with you. Just send me an email and include your audit readiness concern. Why do you need this? What are your concerns? Where are you in this journey? It's free of charge. Item number 1, know your scope. Know your SPLA scope. What's in SPLA, what's not in SPLA, what's in CSP hosting, what's in BYOL, and what is internal use, what is Linux, what is, for example, pure VDI, which is not SPLA. You need to know that. Your data centers, whether that's disaster recovery or not, that is always point number 1. Point number 2, I suggest you get a specialized tool. I'm not insisting it's going to be Octopus or SPLA Manager or Activion or whatever other tool you may think about. I'm just from experience. You need it. It saves so much frustration. You can go without it. It's just easier with it. You can build your own custom script solutions. We've seen script solutions working ideally. Number 3, make sure the tool or your own script covers all the machines in scope. We call it tool health. On a regular basis, check that the tool is healthy. Number 4, when you receive a notice, or better on a regular basis, perform self-assessments. For peace of mind, do your own internal self-audits. Maybe not necessarily full-on, but at least cover the basics. With the server, the products that you provide, make sure that if somebody brings their own licenses, you have evidence of bring your own license. For software like Windows Server, ensure that your calculations are correct. May sound simple. Half the cases, there's a mistake in Windows Server calculations. Something isn't included, something is included that should not be included. Most importantly, ensure that you include all the right hosts and standalone machines and exclude what's not in scope. For other software, don't leave any stones unturned. Verify that all the software running inside hosted machines is known to you and actually required. There is no half pregnancy in licensing, especially in SPLA. Be brutal. Please just be brutal. There's no such thing as we hear often from the IT departments. Oh, it's just there, but nobody's using it. Excuse me, it's bullshit. If it's there, somebody's using it. If it's there, somebody has to pay for it. If nobody's using it, uninstall it, remove it, get rid of it. There's no half pregnancy in licensing. It's there, somebody has to pay for it. Use the same approach to users and security groups. Check them monthly. Delete disabled users. Remove inactive users from security groups. I mean, you probably wash your hands multiple times a day. You need the same hygiene for your Active Directory in SPLA. And in many cases, there's dual responsibility for Active Directory between your teams and your client teams with your end client. And the best way we get asked, how do we ensure that our end client doesn't make mistakes, doesn't accidentally open access to the entire domain? The best way to make them pay attention is to build them accurately on a monthly basis, based on the real data, not something that your sales may say, oh, we can't really tell them that they need to pay us for 3,000 users because last month they paid us for 300. If they don't pay for it, you will pay for it. It's your choice. And experience tells us that the fears of the sales department are not really justified. Nobody lost a client. None of our client providers ever lost a client after going back to the client and saying, guys, you made a mistake in the configuration, fix it, otherwise this is the bill. That's the best way. Show them the money. To enable that capability, you need to ensure that you have a repeatable monthly process of correctly calculating user licenses. This is where custom scripts that you may have, we find often fail because those scripts are often written for a desired configuration and they don't account for human error. If I wanted to give you an example, here's an example. We have a script that calculates Office users in this security group because this is how we designed it. It only counts users on this server, which is our designated terminal server, and only in this security group. There are a few mistakes here. You need to account for accidental installation of Office on other computers. You need the full visibility of any accidental installs, not only what you designed to be, because that's where the problems occur, not where you designed it, not where you want it to run, and not through the security groups you want it to be accessed. Somebody, for debugging purposes, allowed the entire domain in that security group and forgot to remove it next day. It sits there. You get an audit. They find that instead of 50 users, you have 3,000 users authorized to access the server. Remember, actual access doesn't matter. Nobody cares. And then you have a story phase. And then you have to talk about honest mistakes and pray that Microsoft accepts that narrative. Your scripting solutions, if you have your custom scripting solutions, must account for human error. You must leave no stones unturned at all, under no circumstances. If you have an in-house script, check that it's not only counting what you want it to count. The next point is for all your client installs and licenses themselves, demand evidence of licenses, or at least that they accept responsibility in writing. Some kind of part of your terms and conditions, it must be in writing. I have a question from Keith.
The question I have is, when you're talking about security groups and the audit, are they looking for a high watermark over some period of time?
They're looking at your current data. They can't see the high watermarks. Unless you provide them data from a SPLA tool with all the snapshots from the previous periods. If you run typical scripts, they just extract what you have at this particular moment in time. And when they try to calculate your previous requirements, they basically look at creation dates, disabled or enabled status, security group memberships, activity. They do accept last activity date when the account is disabled, because that's the only way to estimate approximately when that user was last time allowed to access a resource. There's no other data really the scripts can return. And that's it. You are required to report high watermark, but in an audit, they only see what they can see currently. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time today. I hope you've learned something useful from me today. My name is Alexander Golev, and I'll see you soon, and have a great day and a great rest of the week. Goodbye.